Hi, everybody, and welcome to Mondays with Mike. It is Monday, and I'm Mike. In fact, it's Monday, June the 10th. Boy, time flies. We're 10 days deep into hurricane season, and that's what I wanted to talk about today was the month of June in hurricane season. What do we usually expect in the month of June? How prepared do you need to be in the month of June? What are some of the risks that we have in the month of June and so forth? And we're also going to talk a little bit about some, sort of a slug of moisture that could be coming our way for next week related to what could be a weak tropical system. So I want to thank you for joining me here on our digital platforms, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, or especially on our smart TV app, Fox Local. Well, let's talk about the month of June. And when we talk about June storms, June tropical systems, the first one that comes to mind, and the first one that should come to mind for folks who have been living in Texas for any period of time, Tropical Storm Allison. Allison made landfall on June 5th of 2001 and was a very, very unusual system. Allison formed in sort of a non-tropical sort of environment. By that, I mean, usually when we talk about the formation of tropical systems, we say we want low shear, right? We talk about that on the Atlantic Ocean, about whether there's shear. If there's high shear, usually it rips the storms apart and things like that. But that's for pure tropical systems. Allison really wasn't that. It was sort of like a subtropical, tropical hybrid. It's the type of system that can sometimes form along frontal boundaries that are out over the Gulf of Mexico, or it can form if there's an upper level area of low pressure that kind of initiates convection at the surface. The bottom line is storms can form in an environment that a lot of times are not textbook kind of tropical settings. And that's what happened with Allison. The other thing that was important before Allison made landfall was how quickly it strengthened. So there was a general area of disturbed weather and kind of cloudiness across Central America and the southern Gulf of Mexico for a couple of days. But I remember watching it and thinking, okay, well, it's really unlikely it's going to develop into a tropical system because the winds aloft were very harsh and it really wasn't all that warm yet. Well, despite that, this thing ramped up into a 60 mile per hour tropical storm / subtropical storm. So the winds really ramped up and it made landfall very quickly, meaning that the Texas residents had very little notice. How little notice? Well, I think it was upgraded to a tropical storm the same day it hit. So if memory serves correctly, it wasn't upgraded to an actual tropical storm until the morning of June 5th, which was a Tuesday, and then made landfall later that day. And the first initial landfall, whoops, what happened to my light here? Come on now. There we go. The first initial landfall brought something like a foot of rain to the area, maybe a little bit more than a foot of rain. I mean, imagine that. I mean, this is literally the way it was. I was a young lad at the time, but was here at Fox 26. And it was incredible, those of you who were here at the time, because you had almost no notice. There was rain in the forecast, but not much. Is this going to keep doing this to me? What is it doing? There was rain in the forecast, but not very much rain in the forecast. And unfortunately, once Allison hit, or once it formed, we knew, okay, there's tropical storm warnings, but it was literally like a few hours notice. You know, you're at work, it's a Tuesday, you know what I mean? And the next thing you know, we're lashed by 12, 15 inches of rain. So Allison made landfall after giving very little notice, and the legacy of Allison, Tropical Storm Allison, was that it didn't go away. So Allison was what I call the Harvey before Harvey. It was really seen as like the storm of the century, even though it was a very young century in 2001. But what it did was one of these never before seen type scenarios. So it made landfall June 5th, dropped terrible flooding rains across the city of Houston, moved northward and stalled. So it went up to around the Lufkin area and sort of just meandered there, like between Houston and Dallas for, a couple of days. There was a brief break. So you had this initial deluge of rain Tuesday. Then there was just a little bit of a break. And then on the 8th and 9th, it came back down and actually moved off the coastline and made another landfall. And the thing is, it was kind of like Harvey did the same thing, moved offshore and made another landfall. It kept pulling the Gulf moisture in day after day. We ended up with accumulations of about 39 inches of rain. That was the highest rainfall total. It was Greens Bayou. So the Northeast Houston area and the east side, and actually right in downtown, because both Buffalo Bayou and White Oak Bayou absorbed an awful lot of water, and they come together downtown. So all of downtown was flooded. The medical center was completely flooded out. There were 22 people who died. 22 people. And it was tragic. It was awful. About half of those people died in their cars or after having to abandon their car. So a lot of it happened at night. People got caught in underpasses in a flood at night. People, I think there was one incident, tragedy of someone in a pickup truck who just they were driving over a bridge and the water just kind of came up. And then you don't know where the bridge is anymore and you end up in the water. So about half of those people, approximately half the people who died of in their car. So, which is just another lesson. And I'm not saying that you can always avoid this, but if there's any chance that you can avoid being on the road in your car in any sort of a threat for flooding or a tropical system, that's really the way to go. How did the other people die? Well, 3 people died from electrocution. Something you don't think of. If a tropical system hits, or really any system for that matter, hits your house and your power goes out, do you know that you are supposed to turn off the power at the breaker until, especially if there's damage to your home, turn off the power at the breaker. The reason is that there were incidents. There was one incident where a lady, I believe, on the east side of Houston, went back into her house. It was still flooded. And either the power had gone out and come back on, or thinking that it was out, she grabbed an appliance and was electrocuted right there on the spot. So that's a very, very important lesson in all tropical systems. If your house is flooded, you have to go to the breaker box and cut off the power until it's safe to turn it back on. There were also people who died tragically in other drownings, an elevator in the medical center. Anyway, not to get too depressing, but I mean, just to push forward the issue that Tropical Storm Allison was an incredible natural disaster, an incredible tragedy. It happened 5 days into hurricane season. And unfortunately, with us living along the Gulf Coast, these things hit with very little notice. You know, sometimes we think we're going to be able to watch systems move across the Atlantic for like a week, and with the big cone of uncertainty and all that. It doesn't always happen that way. Very often, living on the Gulf Coast, you could have storms form very quickly and then hit with very little notice. What's also interesting is that previous to Tropical Storm Allison in 2001, there was actually another Tropical Storm Allison, because the name wasn't retired. Excuse me, that was in 1989. Had to look this one up. I remember it being talked about at the time, But the parallels are amazing because they both, the center of circulation of Alice in 2001 moved over Freeport, Texas, and so did the center of circulation of Tropical Storm Alice in 1989. It also was a slow mover. It also dropped, 30 inches of rain in some places in Texas and in Louisiana. It caused 11 fatalities. So it's amazing the parallels between Tropical Storm Alice in 1989 and Tropical Storm Alice in 2001. Amazing. Well, that name has since been retired, of course. But it's important to know, that other Allison in 1989 hit on June 25th, by the way. So not as early in the season, but still pretty early. There are a couple of other infamous storms that have hit in the month of June. Hurricanes, in fact. For our portion of the Gulf Coast, the one that is historic, and anybody who's spent any time or maybe has any family in Louisiana probably has heard of this one, and that's Hurricane Audrey. So Hurricane Audrey was in the late 50s, 1957. It was one of these worst case scenarios where it hit at night. It was stronger than anybody on the coastline expected. This hit southwest Louisiana. So this was Lake Charles and then down to beneath. So Lake Charles is like this long county parish called Calcasieu Parish. And then directly under that is Cameron Parish, Louisiana. And that one was, when I tell you a wall of water, 10 feet of water, 15 feet of water. So all of the people who live down there went to sleep expecting high winds and, expecting that there was a hurricane or a strong windstorm coming. And they were all drowned. Let's see, I have here, how many people died? It was unbelievable. 431 people. Now, keep in mind, it's very important to keep in mind that in 1957, we didn't have satellites. Remember, this was just like the start of the space race and all that stuff. We didn't have satellites at that point, weather satellites. And the first weather satellite went up and was functional in 1961. And I think, in fact, Hurricane Carla, which hit Galveston, was the first hurricane, or at least one of the first hurricanes to actually be seen on weather satellite. But that's neither here nor there. So Audrey hit, I have it here, on June 25th also. Category 4 hurricane. Category 3. Okay, when it hit Louisiana, it was Category 3. In June, 400 plus fatalities, huge storm surge. So that one is historic, remarkable, scary as heck. Now there's another one, and I got to tell you, I had heard of this one, but in all my years, I never really paid much attention to it, just probably because it made its worst effects up in the northeastern part of the United States, and I just wasn't as familiar with it. And this is Hurricane Agnes. Hurricane Agnes. So Agnes did form in the Gulf of Mexico and did move over Florida, but it slammed Pennsylvania, where it was the state's wettest tropical cyclone, so it brought very serious flooding. This is June of 1972, by the way. Moved through the Carolinas, and finally moved into New England and the East Coast and New York City in that area. And this one, 128 direct deaths from Hurricane Agnes, actually had the highest winds of 85 miles per hour, and spawned tornadoes, lots of tornadoes across Florida and other eastern states. So that's another late June, mid to late June storm. Let's see, other storms of note. We have had storms recently. For example, those of you might remember you might not remember, because it really was like a weird non-story. But in 2015, we got hit by a storm called Tropical Storm Bill. Bill hit in June. It was mid-June. It was the second named storm of the season, but it was the first one to move toward us. And Bill was notorious for being a bit of a dud. It moved inland over Matagorda. It rained. Here's the only thing that I remember from Tropical Storm Bill, honestly, was the meme that went around where somebody like knocked a chair over and said, "We will rebuild," or something like that. You know those memes that go around? That's what I remember from Tropical Storm Bill, because it was 2015, and that was sort of like the, everybody was on Facebook and that time, like, I don't know. It was like Facebook memes. I don't think it was, Twitter hadn't really picked up just yet, and Instagram hadn't picked up just yet. But anyway, so that's Tropical Storm Bill. The bottom line I'm trying to tell you is that storms in the month of June are not common. If you think about the worst storms that have, let's say, ever hit Texas, ever hit the Houston area, you're mainly talking about August, September, right? Hurricane Ike was September 13th. Hurricane Alicia was late August. Hurricane Harvey was late August. So, most of these storms are mid-season, sort of that heart of the season storms. But we need to be ready from day one, because June storms tend to form in the Gulf. See, these storms like Ike tend to form way out in the Atlantic. And like Ike, we tracked it and it moved across South Florida and like kind of the Florida Straits and it moved over to our area. Excuse me, my nose itches. Harvey didn't maybe give us as much notice, but remember it moved across the Yucatan. I mean, we had a little while to track it before it moved in, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Some of these storms, though, that form in June, it's like, bam, it forms and then it hits the either that day or the next day. And I do think that now, in 2023, our technology, look, the satellites are better, the computer models are way better. I mean, think about how in 2001, we didn't have iPhones. Computers were, think about like a computer that you had and your internet connection, what all that stuff was like 23 years ago. It's a lot different. I said 2023, it's 2024, isn't it? 2024. So 23 years ago, the computing power that we had was a lot less. And so as a result, the computer models had to be less complicated. So they couldn't take in as much data and they couldn't process that data as quickly. So you either have two choices when you're making a computer model. You can either bring in more data and have it take forever to come up with a solution, or you could take in less data and get it in a reasonable amount of time, like maybe 3 or 4 hours. So that's what we still do now. It's just that there's more data going in because the computers are more powerful. So what I'm trying to say is that I'm confident that we will have better warning. We'll have more accurate assessments of hazards if we were to get a tropical storm Allison today compared to the way it was in 2001. I also think even compared to Harvey, which was only 7 years ago, almost 7 years ago, I think that we're going to have a better time, communicating those hazards than we would back then. But when it comes to these June storms, if you take anything away from this, just know that we need to always be on alert in June. There is a lot of moisture. One of the primary risks with June storms is going to be rain. June is actually, traditionally our rainiest month of the year, May, June. And so there's a lot of moisture in the atmosphere. And if there's even a weak storm, even if you hear, the storm has 35 mile per hour winds and it's tropical depression number 1 and, it's hardly any wind with it. Remember, every storm has certain hazards, and what we need to watch for around here is rain, especially given the spring that we've had. Which brings me to a system that could be coming our way next week. And right now, there's nothing specific to point at, but I'll tell you that the GFS computer model, which is the American model, has been pretty consistent in showing a plume of moisture coming up from the south, from the Yucatan area and down around Honduras, Nicaragua, surging to the north, coming up early next week. Now, It may go straight into Louisiana and they may get deluged with rain and we might just get a little bit, or it might all go to Florida. It's way too early to say at this point here on Monday, June the 10th. But I'll tell you that it's something we're going to be watching for you certainly all week long, because whoever gets stuck under that plume of moisture is probably going to get a lot of rain. So hopefully it doesn't come to fruition, but it does look like somebody's going to be in the path of that. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me for Mondays with Mike. Sorry for the light thing in the beginning. Shout out to my mom and Neil. Happy early birthday to my mom. Actually, I have one more Mondays with Mike before her birthday, but a happy early birthday. And that'll do it for this week. Also, I want to invite you to join us. We are doing a new show every day. Yes, daily on Fox Local. It's called Forecasting with Friends. I think you could find it on YouTube also, but we would like you to watch Fox Local. It's called Forecasting with Friends. I'm not real happy about the title, but nobody asked me. But anyway, it's called Forecasting with Friends. And it's going to be me, it's going to be John Dawson, it's going to be Allison Gargaro, and we're going to be talking about weather of the day, but also we're going to have interviews. We're going to hear from experts from the National Hurricane Center, from the National Weather Service. We had an interview with Dr. Phil Klotzbach, who does the hurricane predictions for Colorado State University. I mean, we're going to get like some of the heavy hitters in the world of weather and have them featured on the show, and also just local folks getting people like you prepared for this hurricane season. So hope you have a great day, everybody. Try and stay cool out there and watch out for some scattered storms over the next few